It's incredible, Chuck. These people just seem to be breaking their necks to give this money right back to us. Folks, I am happy to report that the recession is now officially over, and we have nobody to thank but all these black people with their taste for expensive clothes, fancy cars, and of course, gaudy jewelry.
So typically you guys see me do videos about travel, about my life in Spain, in the Dominican Republic, but today I want to take some time to speak to white Americans and other non-black Americans that don't support the idea of reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. Now, we as black Americans, we are not a monolith. I don't pretend to speak for the entire group, so I'm sure there'll be some other black people in the comments that don't like some of the things that I have said, but it's been on my heart to tell you this because honestly, I think reparations would probably be the best thing for everyone. Not only black Americans, but it would be something that would be good and shared by everyone in this country. So, first of all, let's talk about what reparations are for those of you who maybe are tuning in from another country outside of America and have no idea what this is about. So let's take a moment. So as most of you already know, people of African descent were originally brought to North America, the Caribbean, and South America with the intentions of making them slaves and forcing them to work to develop economies and countries. For over 300 years in the North American continent, people of African descent worked and struggled as slaves. There were many laws made against these people to limit their freedom, their movement, and even their access to knowledge. For a very long time, to teach a slave how to read was illegal. Soon after slavery came something else called Jim Crow. This was segregation. And obviously this had a huge economic impact on our community. For many, many years, black people were not allowed to build wealth in this country. The moments that we took opportunities to do something against the struggle, against having that boot on our neck, it will be destroyed. There have been efforts in the past to try to rectify and correct the situation. The first being the promise of 40 acres and a mule for every formerly enslaved person. Preparations were being made to give that land and those mules to former slaves, about 4 million at that time. But the new president, Andrew Johnson, at that time, who was a former slave owner and a white supremacist, decided to kill that order. Some of the land had already been allocated, and it was given back to the former slave owners. Let's fast forward a bit to just regular old Jim Crow. How do you expect black people to be able to build wealth and do well in this country when you severely limited where they're able to work, study, and live? You have boxed them in and given them few opportunities. Sure, we can see some that were able to escape that box, but those people are the exceptions, not the rule. So despite these struggles and difficulties, black people were still able to make some pretty significant achievements. The one being Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This part of town of Tulsa at that time was thought to be the wealthiest black community in all of America, the Black Wall Street. And in 2 days in 1921, the white folks decided they can't have that anymore, and they burned down the entire section of town, destroying and razing everything and leaving people homeless and essentially destroying Black Wall Street. Once again, an effort to build wealth, destroyed. To give just one more example of how America has stifled black economic progress, let's talk about the GI Bill. The GI Bill was a law that was passed at the end of World War II that gave free college education and cheap home loans to veterans. Men returning home from the Pacific and the European theaters were able to get nice houses and go to school for free. This gave them a huge leg up, except only if you're white. That did not apply to all the black men that went there and risked their lives fighting Nazis and thought that they would come back to a country that would also include them in the fold and reward them. And they were denied these benefits as well. The GI Bill created essentially the healthy American middle class, but we were excluded from that. So by and large, black Americans today are asking for compensation that was not paid to our ancestors, And number two, give to us what is due to us. We were excluded from so many things, that we were the ones that built this country. Even the White House is not an exception. You can look it up for yourself. Even the White House was built by black hands in chains. And it's a very callous attitude that some people have to just say, oh, well, I didn't have any slaves. I don't have anything to do with that. Interesting. Because every single white American that says that, most of them have benefited from these sorts of laws that aided white people, but we're not for black people. We were excluded from. So maybe you feel like, oh, I didn't have any slaves. I didn't do this. Well, guess what? Your family was able to build wealth over many generations. And ours were not allowed. In this case, reparations look like giving financial compensation to the descendants of enslaved people. There have been some other variations of this. Some people say reparations should look like social programs and benefits for the black community. Others say that it should look like financial compensation given to African governments. Yes, because we all know that giving large amounts of cash to well-known corrupt politicians is going to work out well for everyone, right? So let's take a look at something really quick. It's a 3-minute skit from my favorite comedian, Dave Chappelle. And you know, he called this back in the early 2000s. And even though this is comedy, it's a joke, he's right on the money. He's right on the money today. Take a look.
Our top story. As we all know, Congress recently approved paying over $1 trillion to African Americans as reparations for slavery. Well, today, the first checks were sent out. Wendy Mullen is standing by live in Queens with more. Wendy?
Thanks, Chuck. We're standing here in front of the Olympic Liquor Store in Queens, where scores of African Americans have been lined up for hours. We spoke to a few of them earlier. Ladies, may we get a word?
Hide the money, y'all. There's poor people around. With your broke ass.
Sir, now that you've got your check, do you plan on quitting your job driving this truck?
Truck driver? I ain't no truck driver. I'm a janitor.
Janitor?
That's right, baby. I just bought this truck straight cash. And I got enough cigarettes to last me and my family for the rest of our lives. I'm rich, biatch!
So, Chuck, as you can see, it's been a pretty amazing day. Back to you.
Wait, Wendy, let me get this straight. Why aren't there any banks in the ghetto?
Well, Chuck, that's because banks hate black people, but I think that's about to change. Back to you.
I bet you're right, Wendy. Hot damn almighty, I bet you're right. Well, these checks aren't just affecting things on Beach Street. Wall Street is having a big day as well. Our financial correspondent, Michael Peterson, is there. Michael, what's happening?
Chuck, a lot of activity, as you can imagine, here on the market. These people are spending money like hotcakes. Get this, Sprint stock has skyrocketed after the news that 2 million delinquent phone bills have been paid just this morning. Incredible. Gold is way up. Diamonds are at their most expensive level ever. Catchphrase around here is certainly bling bling. Oil has dropped to $1.50 a barrel, while chicken shot to $600 a bucket. Amazing news there. Just about everything on the market is up. However, watermelon is surprisingly flat to find many analysts out there. Chuck, get this. 8,000 record labels have been started in the last hour. Incredible. Cadillac announced that they sold 3 million Escalade trucks this afternoon alone. It's incredible, Chuck. These people just seem to be breaking their necks to give this money right back to us. Folks, I am happy to report that the recession is now officially over, and we have nobody to thank but all these black people with their taste for expensive clothes, fancy cars, and, of course, gaudy jewelry.
So, the thing about black Americans is that we are some of the biggest consumers in America, despite having the least amount of wealth. Now, I've already talked to you about the historical reasons of why that circumstance is the way it is. But there's also something to be said about our own culture and the way that we are as a people, that though we don't have as much to spend as other groups, we spend everything we have. Essentially, what I want to say here is that, look, giving black Americans reparations for what happened to our ancestors in the past and the historical disadvantages that have been put in front of us, we're going to share that with everyone. Don't think that if you give the black community billions of dollars, that suddenly we're going to be tight-fisted and we're not going to spend. Mark my words, it would be the greatest economic stimulus in American history. Not only for us, but for you. Because we're going to buy. We're going to buy cars. We're going to buy chains. We're going to buy houses. We're going to go on vacations. We're going to buy $400 eyelashes. Yes. And we will buy that from anyone. Because a dollar doesn't stay very long in our community. But hey, let's not take my word for it. Let's take a look at an article. The common recurring statistic in money circulation within communities, according to the NAACP and other organizations, suggests that the black dollar is unregulated. Studies say that the average lifespan of the dollar is approximately 28 days in Asian communities, 19 days in Jewish communities, 17 days in white communities, and 6 hours in the black community. 6 hours. You give us that money, within 6 hours you will have it right back into your pocket. I'll tell you why this is a big deal. I'll tell you why this is controversial. Let's look at the Pew Research Center, one of the biggest research centers in America. They did a study in 2022, at the end of 2022, and they deduced that 77% of black Americans support reparations, compared with 18% of white Americans. So, it's an uphill battle. And I think that resistance stems from the argument of, I never owned slaves. My grandfather never owned slaves. Why should my tax dollars have to go to paying black people that I don't know and didn't do anything to? Fair question. They also like to have the argument, oh, well, my family's Irish. We never owned slaves. We came here as immigrants. We were very poor. Did you know the Irish were slaves too? Yeah, I hear that argument a lot. And the thing is, like, we can play the Irish card. We can play the my family didn't have slaves card. But guess what? You still benefited from all the laws that were made in your favor at our expense. Your family has always benefited from this, from the very beginning of this country. So come on. Let's be reasonable. Now, I understand the arguments of other people of color from the Latino community, from the Asian community, that don't understand why their tax dollars should be going towards reparations for black people because, well, historically they had nothing to do with our oppression, right? And they're right about that. But they shouldn't forget that they enjoy their rights today at our expense as well. That it was the black civil rights movement that also gave rights to Latinos, that gave rights to Asians as well. And even the Jewish community, to a smaller extent, benefited from the civil rights movement. I know that coming from Baltimore, it is in the city's history that before the civil rights movement, one could see signs around the city, especially in places like public pools, that would say, no Jews, no dogs, no alcohol. And all that went away after the civil rights movement. And the idea of reparations is not that far-fetched. To give you a more modern example, well, let's look at Holocaust survivors and their heirs. That wasn't 300 years ago. It wasn't even 100 years ago. But Germany stepped up and has paid money to those Holocaust survivors and their families. From 1945 to 2018, the German government paid nearly $87 billion to Holocaust survivors and their heirs. And guess what? I don't remember hearing any big fuss about that. I don't remember seeing stories in the news and saying that no, they shouldn't get that money. It was paid out to them, they've gotten their money, they're quiet. And I tell you something else, this is perfect timing for this. This is the perfect timing. We've got a conservative Supreme Court that is dismantling affirmative action and other kinds of things that affect people of color. Well, I tell you what, I think you would hear a lot less resistance from black people and other racial minorities in the country if reparations were given. Me, as a black American male, I can tell you that if you were to put that money in my hands, I would tell you I don't think there's a need for affirmative action. I don't think there would be a need for diversity hires and quotas. Because guess what? Now we're on a clean slate. Clean slate. The debt has been paid. You have righted the wrong as much as you can. At this point, I say, okay, we're at peace. You don't owe me anything. I don't owe you anything. The past is now the past. So if we squander the money, we waste it, we end up back being poor, or whatever it is, it's our fault. And no one can say that white America didn't do its part in correcting the issue. Let me explain why I say that we could remove affirmative action and diversity hiring if reparations were given. Because in that case, the black community would have enough wealth, ideally, to send their children to decent schools. Schools that are not falling apart, that have clean water, that have competent teachers, that have the latest technology. We can now afford to put our children in those schools or build our own private schools to meet those needs. There wouldn't be such a great disparity between black testing grades and white testing grades if we had the resources to be able to build decent schools and send our children there. Thus, we will be more competitive on the job market. Not only that, but not all of us would squander our money. We will have some smart ones that will build their own businesses that will be incredibly successful, putting more jobs on the market. And with a black-owned company, I wouldn't expect to find much discrimination against black people in that company. Now, I've already told you that I think the timing for this is right. Now, I should have specified politically, this is a good moment. But economically, maybe that's something that we do have to consider. Some people bring up the concerns of, would reparations for black people cause inflation? And I think it's a good question. So then we must discuss implementation. If the government were to borrow money or just print more money to pay these reparations, of course this would increase inflation and be terrible for everyone. To mitigate an inflationary effect, funds would have to be reallocated from established programs, which means taking some funding out of another area. That will be up for Congress to debate. Or everyone would have to pay more taxes, which I don't think anyone would be in favor of. And of course, the biggest question is, how much does each individual receive? And that's a question of debate right now all across the country. One thing I think is worth considering is the distribution. Will this be a one-time payment, or will this be spread out over a long period of time? Personally, I think the latter option would be the wisest choice for our community and the country. Now I want to speak to black Americans. Don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. I've only pointed out points and data that have been established here. We have poor spending habits. And likely, that money that is given to us is going to be shared amongst all Americans. Not a bad thing. But because we don't exactly have a good control of our spending. We don't keep money in our community. And that's the truth. I'll tell you one more thing. I want to be wrong. I want to think that black Americans given this opportunity would show wiser spending habits. But also, their spending would still have an effect that would benefit everyone. Let's prove the stats wrong. Let's build some wealth, y'all. I think it would be quite wise to take the chance to fix this error now, and also understand that this is going to benefit you too. You small business owners, if you have something the black community typically buys or wants, you're going to profit. Give it some thought. And when there's a competent plan for reparations at the national level, when that plan goes to Congress and is being seriously considered, whenever that is, you should support it. If there are reparations efforts being made in your state or your city, you should support it. Because in the end, it's going to be good for everyone. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out to listen to my opinions on this. This is not the typical topic that I cover here on this channel, but it's something that I felt like needed to be said. Nevertheless, check out some of the other things I like to talk about here. Don't forget to subscribe And do me the favor of sharing this. Pass it along to your friend, your coworker. See you next time.